Before this video starts, I would just like to give a quick little warning to everyone who sees this. Just like during my Steiner vs. Gladio matchup that I did last year, when it comes to Final Fantasy IX, I openly admit that I don't really know it all that well. So during my research of Steiner, I only got a glimpse of what Zidane is all about. So going into this particular matchup, this is only the second time I'm using a character that I was completely blind to. So inevitably, there may be a few pronunciation problems. So if you have any comments just to insult me on my pronunciation, I apologize, but when it comes to Final Fantasy, that's kind of an unavoidable error. There are several characters and words that have different pronunciations depending on who you are. But the point is that we all acknowledge that we are talking about the same person. So with that warning out of the way, let's get started. Zidane Tribal has probably one of the most confusing origins I've ever encountered in all of Final Fantasy. He began his life as an angel of death created by Garland, who was the ruler of the dead planet Terra. Garland's job was to take the souls of Terrians and place them within the bodies of humanoid vessels called genomes. Though Kuja was created first, he was deemed a failure by Garland and was replaced by Zidane. Infuriated by Garland's decision to create Zidane, Kuja would then take Zidane and abandon him on the planet of Gaia, where he would be found at the age of 4 by the leader of a band of thieves named Baku, who would then go on to raise him and teach Zidane in their ways. At the age of 13, Zidane would go out on his own to seek out his origins, and he would travel for 2 years, and during which he would meet and befriend the Dragon Knight Freya. After returning from his travels, Zidane would take on a mission given to him from Limblum's regent Cid to make his way to Alexandria and kidnap Princess Garnet. Though the mission would be a success, the airship he was on would crash into the evil forest, and now teaming up with the Alexandrian knight Steiner, they would battle a giant tree in an attempt to rescue the princess. It was during this battle that Zidane would perform his first trance ability for the first time. After this, the group was successful in rescuing the Princess Garnet and escaping the forest, but Zidane's friend Blank was caught by a plant spider and was petrified, but Blank managed to throw a central map to Zidane so they could get out. As the group made their way into the ice cavern, Zidane managed to defeat the first of 3 members of the Black Watts, which was sent by the Queen to recover Princess Garnet. Before entering the village of Dali, Zidane suggested Princess Garnet take on an alias name, and she chose the name Dagger after Zidane's weapon. Once in the village of Dali, Zidane asked why Dagger wanted to escape Alexandria, and she only revealed that she needed to get to the city of Limblum. The group then decided to commandeer a cargo ship that Steiner lied about and told them that it was going to Limblum, when in actuality it was going back to Alexandria, when the group was attacked by the second member of the Black Waltz. After defeating the second member of the Black Waltz, Zidane realized that the cargo ship was indeed heading back to Alexandria, but they managed to take control of the cargo ship and change its course towards Limblum, only to be attacked by the third and final member of the Black Waltz, who managed to retreat from the battle before he was defeated. The group would then make their way to Limblum, and Dagger was quickly recognized and was taken to meet the regent Cid. While Dagger was speaking to Cid, Zidane would run into his old friend Freya, who just so happened to be in town to participate in the Festival of the Hunt. The following day, Zidane participated in the Festival of the Hunt, but before they could conclude the event, everyone was alerted to the news that an Alexandrian army had begun an attack on a nearby city of Burmecia. Wanting to help out the civilians, the party agreed to help out the city of Burmecia, but for her safety, Zidane suggested that Dagger stay behind. Before the party of Zidane, Vivi, and Freya could leave for Burmecia, Dagger would slip in some sleeping powder in their meals and decided that she and Steiner would make their way back to Alexandria in an attempt to talk to her mother out of starting a war. When Zidane, Vivi, and Freya woke up, they believed that Dagger and Steiner had made their way to Burmecia, so they set off after them. On their way to Bermesia, they would pass through the Quin's marshes where they would encounter the blue mage Quina, whose master insisted that Quina join their party. Once they arrived in Bermesia, the party discovered that the city had become infested with black mage dolls, and after fighting their way through the palace, they discovered that the Queen, General Beatrix, and Kuja were responsible for the attack. Upon hearing that the king of Bermesia had escaped to the land of Clara, the group would then challenge General Beatrix but were quickly defeated by her, and the Queen, General Beatrix, and Kuja would then leave for Clara. The group would follow them to Clara, but the Queen would summon Odin to decimate all of Clara. The group then managed to sneak on board the Queen's flagship, the Red Rose, and overhearing her plans to execute the princess who had been retrieved back in Alexandria. Using teleportation magic, the group would make their way back to Alexandria ahead of the Queen, and now teaming up with Steiner and his ally Marcus, managed to rescue Dagger and escape the city through some underground tunnels. After witnessing the invasion of Limblum and recruiting a young summoner named Iko, the party would come to find out that the Queen had turned on Kuja, but unfortunately Kuja would succeed in enslaving the dragon Bahamut and ordered it to attack the Queen's fleet, killing her in the process. After the Queen's death, the group agreed to return to Alexandria, where Princess Garnet would be made the next queen. Once back in Alexandria, the castle would then be attacked by Kuja, but Garnet and Iko would combine their powers to summon Alexander to battle Kuja. Kuja attempted to enslave Alexander, but Garland appeared from nowhere to interfere by destroying Alexander and Alexandria, but Zidane led a group to save Garnet and Iko before the castle could completely crumble. They eventually discovered that Kuja came from another world and using a collection of special mirrors managed to make their way to a portal that transported them to the world of Terra. Once in Terra, Zidane discovered that not only was this a place where he was born, but it was Garland himself who created him. Garland attempted to remove Zidane's soul in order to make him fulfill his original purpose that Garland had made for him when he was created, but Kuja, now with his trance ability, would go on to successfully kill Garland. However, before Garland died, he revealed to Kuja that he had a limited lifespan, and learning of this, Kuja became immensely enraged, and he was determined to not only destroy all of Terra, but all of Gaia as well. The party would eventually manage to stop and defeat Kuja once and for all, and sometime later, after Zidane was thought to have been dead, he returned to Alexandria to reunite with Queen Garnet and all of her friends. Tidus was the son of the legendary Blitzball superstar named Jekt. By the age of 18, Tidus himself became not only the captain of his home city's blitzball team, the Xanarkan Abes, but became a blitzball superstar himself with his skills in the sport only being rivaled by his father. During a championship blitzball match in his hometown of Xanarkan, the city was attacked by a creature named Sin. However, Tidus did manage to survive this ordeal. It was at this time that Tidus ran into his childhood protector Orin, and the two would fight their way in an attempt to escape the city. However, Orin himself had other plans, and using a portal from within Sin's body, the two were transported 1,000 years into the future to the land of Spira. After a small encounter with a small group of Al Bhed and surviving a second attack by Sin, Tidus would wash up on the island of Besaid. It was here that Tidus would meet his future allies, the captain of the blitzball team, the Besaid Aurochs Waka, the powerful mage Lulu, the Ronso warrior Kamari, and the young summoner Yuna. Tidus agreed to travel with Yuna and her guardians to the city of Luca, and it was here that Tidus would meet once again up with Orin. Orin informed Tidus that his father Jekt had become Sin, and the reason Orin had brought him to Spira was to keep his promise to Jekt to have Tidus help defeat him. It was also at this time that Tidus and Orin were officially elevated to the status of guardian for Yuna. Tidus would travel with Yuna and her guardians all across Spira. However, once the party reached the peak of Mount Gagazet, Tidus would pass out only to be told by the faith of the Aeon Bahamut that he himself was a dream of the faith, and once Sin and his creator Yevon were defeated, that he would disappear. Knowing this, Tidus chose not to inform his fellow guardians of this truth and continued on with Yuna's pilgrimage. High Summoner Yuna and her guardians would eventually fight their way to the bowels of Sin itself, and it was there that they managed to defeat Yevon, bringing forth the eternal calm for Spira. Once all of the fighting was over, Tidus began to disappear, and after saying his final goodbyes to Yuna and her fellow guardians, Tidus would jump off the Al Bhed airship and disappear completely. However, his story would not end there, because only 2 years later, after Yuna had saved all of Spira from the unsent spirit Shuyin, who wanted to use a powerful weapon called Vegnagun to destroy all of Spira, to say thank you to Yuna, the Faith would use their powers and resurrect Tidus, reuniting him with Yuna on the island of Besaid. Well, what's up again there guys, Brian here at 3TR here to present another one of my Final Fantasy Versus Series matchups, and this one in particular has been heavily requested by a number of you for a very long time, as the thief Zidane will take on the Blitzball superstar Tidus in the ultimate showdown of the speedsters in all of Final Fantasy. Now, during my research of Zidane, there were a number of blind spots combatively, so to fill in these gaps I decided that I will be using elements from his appearances in the Dissidia series, and the same goes for Tidus. And for those of you who have criticized me in the past when it comes to using Dissidia as a source, that rule only applies to the antagonist characters, since their presentation in the Dissidia games was clearly meant to nerf them down in a power sense to make them feel more balanced for a fighting game. But as for the protagonists, their presentations have been consistent with what they have been shown to be able to pull off in their individual interest in the main series of Final Fantasy games. So with that out of the way, let us begin, as I will start by comparing these two physically. Now when it comes to Zidane, he is classified as a 16-year-old genome, but when it comes to his height, there seems to be a serious error in the official records. As labeled in the official Final Fantasy 25th Anniversary Ultimatum, Zidane is labeled as being, and get this, he is labeled as being 5'7". I cannot even begin to tell you how ridiculous that sounds. Now using this example here when comparing him to someone like Terra, who on record is labeled as being 5'3" before she's wearing heels, and I'm sure you guys can see the height problem. There is no way in hell this guy is 5'7". So using multiple shots from Dissidia that I could find of him standing next to other characters, for my particular matchup, I will be placing Zidane's height at 4'10", which seems pretty fair for me. Now, the genome race was created by Garland as a way to vessel the souls of Terrians. Now, due to his size and lifestyle of a thief, he was taught since the age of 4 and has shown an exceptional level of speed, flexibility, and athleticism. Being a genome also gives him access to his tail, which he can use as an extra grip to grab onto an opponent or an item if he wishes. His combat experience throughout Final Fantasy IX would have undoubtedly toughened him up, and due to his physical makeup of not being human by genetic standards, since he was genetically engineered, it is more than likely that he doesn't suffer any of the physical disadvantages that humans suffer. So in terms of his durability, it's probably fair to say that he can take a lot more damage than most of us. However, due to his size and combative approach, what he excels in speed, he lacks in strength and power in a pure physical sense without the aid of his trance ability. By the end of Final Fantasy X-2, Tidus was a 19-year-old human male standing 5'9", and due to his physical build as a Blitzball superstar, he was in great shape with a high skill performance level of being athletic. He is capable of jumping great heights easily and is extremely acrobatic, capable of performing flips and jumps at remarkable speeds. And in an overall physical sense, it was his speed that gave him his greatest advantage in combat. Being in such great physical shape as the Blitzball player that he was, made Tidus the key speed fencer of his party, capable of running and dodging attacks at remarkable speeds. However, it has been shown that although he is in great shape, he may not have much upper body strength, as this was shown when Tidus and Auron were escaping Zanarkand during Sin's first attack. After Auron had handed him over a sword given to him from his father Jecht, Tidus had a very difficult time handling the weight of the sword. However, I do believe that he would have had a good amount of time to develop his strength by some degree over the course of his pilgrimage, but not by much. However, Tidus' greatest physical defect was that he was clearly not one of the toughest members of his group, as his physical qualities clearly state that Tidus is not physically built to take a lot of physical damage, and an excessive use of his speed can burn through his stamina faster than anyone in his party. Having said that, Tidus is by no means a complete lightweight, and he has proven on multiple occasions that he is more than capable of taking blows from clearly physically superior opponents for a short period of time. He is nowhere near being a human tank who can take great deals of damage on the course of a battle like his allies Orin or Kamari, so in a nutshell, Tidus has all the physical qualities of an Olympic track runner with a touch of swimming and some lightweight boxing thrown in the mix. When it comes to the physicality of both Zidane and Tidus, they have a lot of similarities, but enough differences to tell them apart. In Tidus' corner, I would grant him the obvious height advantage along with his reach and speed and athleticism, but for Zidane, while he too is a speedster, I wouldn't say that he is quite as fast as Tidus, but fast enough to at least keep up, and thanks to his better management of stamina and flexibility, he at least in a physical sense is nearly on par with him, if only slight below him. Despite neither one of these two really being strength-based characters, Tidus has shown a much higher level of strength without enhancements, while Zidane is clearly the tougher between the two, being able to take far more damage than Tidus can without his combative performance decreasing. In my opinion, the advantage is going to go to the individual who I believe will be able to manage their advantages over the other better and maintain control and dictate the pace of the fight without needing to fall back on their special abilities or combative and magical enhancements. And while the edge would be very, very small, I determined that Tidus will get the very, very slight edge in physical capabilities. Now, while Zidane cannot exactly perform practical forms of black, white, or even blue magic like his fellow party members can, he does have a good number of action and support abilities that are designed to either affect his opponents or in the support category aid his allies when they need help. Though his action abilities are kinda all over the place and random, like abilities like Soul Blade and Lucky 7, his most powerful technique is that of the Trance ability. The Trance ability allows for a temporary transformation in a new stronger physical form that not only grants a user a much more powerful collection of offensive attacks, but almost doubles his combative output. While in this form, Zidane can perform powerful attacks like Free Energy, Tidal Flame, Scoop Art, Shift Break, Stellar Circle 7, Mellow Twister, or Mio Twister, Solution 9, and his most powerful attack, Grand Lethal. And unlike limit breaks or overdrive attacks, Zidane can actually perform these attacks one after another without needing to refill his battle gauge over the course of a battle, which ultimately will give Zidane an immense level of offensive potential as long as he can get all his attacks out before the trance transformation expires, leaving him only momentarily exposed to attacks. Before we start analyzing Tidus' magical and special abilities, just like every previous matchup that I have done involving Final Fantasy X characters, I will be limiting their magical and special abilities only to the abilities that are specifically linked to them in their specific section of the sphere grid. So with that said, though Tidus may not be a very diverse magic caster on his own, like Orin, his magical and special abilities are very combatively focused. His entire magical and skill set is designed around the concept of being able to deliver more hits on his opponents or reducing his opponent's ability to react with a counterattack. With this, Tidus' only real effective magical spells are Haste and Slow, which allow Tidus to speed up the combative performance of his and his allies with the ability of Haste, and being able to reduce the combative performance of his enemies with Slow. Tidus also posted a series of special abilities which can be somewhat have similar functions to that of magical abilities, but with some diversity. The abilities of Cheer and Provoke allow Tidus to raise a party's strength and defense. The abilities Delay Attack and Delay Buster have a chance to cancel out an opponent's offensive maneuver, and Quick Hit allows Tidus to quickly blindside an opponent and attack them immediately without them having a chance to react. On another note, Tidus may have been a dedicated speed fencer, but when it comes to using his blade in combat, he did have a series of powerful strength-based and power-focused attacks that he had access to in the form of his overdrive attacks. By the end of Yuna's pilgrimage, Tidus had access to 4 overdrive attacks that all utilized Tidus' exceptional speed and athleticism. Spiral Attack was a singular power strike to perform after performing a series of flips. Slice and Dice was a random of 6 passive strikes while running past an opponent. Energy Rain fired a series of energy projectiles at the ground, off-balancing an opponent. And Blitz Ace was a series of 8 devastating power strikes delivered at blinding speed, ending with Tidus kicking a Blitzball at his opponents to finish them off. In conclusion, Tidus may have not have had a lot of magical tricks up his sleeve, but what tricks he did have at his disposal could be applied with great effectiveness. This department, while easy to call, is a little bit cryptic to break down. At the very beginning of the fight, there is no question that in their base forms, Tidus has the more effective and focused collection of magical and special abilities at his disposal, and while Zidane's action and support abilities are simple enough to either be rendered useless or, in Tidus' case, easy to evade, once Zidane enters his transform, not only will most, if not all, of Tidus' magical abilities be useless in one particular way or another, but some of these can actually be used against him. Outside of his overdrives, Tidus' most effective magical abilities are haste and slow, and while the haste ability greatly increases his combative speed, it seriously burns his stamina very quickly, and it's very unlikely that the slow spell would be of any use against Zidane while he's in the transform. At that rate, Zidane would be firing off his enhanced attacks, and due to their magnitude, all Tidus could do is evade, not giving him any opportunity to counterattack until the transformation wears out. And when that happens, Tidus may be far enough away to execute some sort of counter-offense while Zidane returns back to his base form, but that's very unlikely. The best time for Tidus to make effective use of his magical and special attacks would be at the very beginning of the fight, but due to his particular style and mindset of combat when it comes to opening stages of a fight, it's more than likely that he would hold back on this until he analyzes his opponents in order to give him a better idea of what attacks he should use. In conclusion, what Zidane's trance ability allows him to do is not only take 100% of control of the battle itself, but it allows him to turn Tidus' greatest magical strength and use it against him very significantly. And it is for these reasons that I am giving Zidane the dominant edge in magical and special abilities. In the official Final Fantasy IX canon, Zidane has access to 2 different types of weapons, the first being daggers and the second being thief swords, but for this particular matchup I'll be granting him the use of his daggers only. The weapon that Zidane will be wielding is called the Mage Mashers, which are a pair of twin daggers. Visually, the Maze Mashers feature a green and gray handle with gold linings around it, and a slight jagged curved purple blade that has some markings along the side of the middle of the blade itself. The markings in the edge of the blade are lighter in shape than they rest. While shorter than most swords, the Mage Mashers do measure at about 3 feet long from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade. Due to its name, the Mage Mashers have the ability to inflict silence on an opponent, preventing them from using any of their magic. In combat, Zidane wields both of these daggers in a reverse grip, which has its advantages and disadvantages that I will go into in the next department. But a very interesting quality of the Maze Mashers is how Zidane can actually connect the hilts, turning this weapon into a double-bladed sword, which grants him even more options in battle. Tidus wields a unique sword named the Brotherhood, which was given to him by Wakka as a gift, which was originally meant for Wakka's brother Chapu. The weapon itself was a very light weapon in design, which allowed Tidus to handle it very easily, allowing him to put his use of speed attacks to good use, and it overall had a blade length of about 4 feet. The weapon itself had a number of special qualities which gave it a number of technical properties. The sword had the ability to give its user a 15% increase in strength, and though this certainly did help in Tidus' lack of physical strength, it was not strong enough to allow him to pierce through an opponent's defenses. The weapon also carried a unique ability called Water Strike, which allowed the weapon to have a serious effect against opponents that were vulnerable to water. However, one issue that I myself have had with this weapon is the material of the blade itself. Since the blade is not made of any sort of material designed for cutting, I really question on whether or not this sword is made for cutting or simply hitting things. It would be the same kind of factor if Tidus was to be wielding a weapon made of wood. However, I think that this sword is more based on using his speed rather than being not very lethal at all. Like the magical and special abilities department, this one is really easy to call. The only advantage that Tidus' Brotherhood sword grants him is that it's a foot longer in range, which grants him a slight edge, but in a fast-paced fight like this one's going to be, that may not play as much of a factor. But not only is Zidane carrying two weapons, which makes it significantly easier for him to attack and defend at the same time, the Mage Master's capability of joining at the hilt grants Zidane an entirely new set of offensive and defensive options, and when you throw into the fact that the Mage Master's ability to perform silence on an opponent, taking away their access to magical abilities, and you have a weapon that literally can take away Tidus' greatest strength as a combatant. Now, while Tidus' Brotherhood sword does grant him a 15% increase in strength, not only do I not think that that would be enough to put a significant pressure on an opponent's defenses, but Zidane can simply evade that strike, rendering this small increase in strength not very effective at all. For all these reasons, Zidane's Mage Master is going to take the edge in weapons. For anyone who's been watching my Versus series long enough, seeing as how this is the 19th matchup that I have done involving sword users, you should know right from the beginning that I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better illustrate and describe the martial and tactical approaches of both these characters. So now that that's out of the way, before Zidane's mission to Alexandria to kidnap Princess Garnet took place, Zidane had spent 10 years with the Tantalus Theater troupe learning their ways as a thief, and up to that point his combative focus would have been to either rely on stealth tactics or, if you were caught, needing to get through a situation rather quickly. But his time fighting alongside his wide variety of party members taught him the importance of being able to hold one's ground, especially when he was granted access to fight as part of a group. But this did not diminish his original skill set if and when he was forced to fight on his own. Because of this, I do believe that as a combatant, he most likely would have resembled something of a mix between that of Ahsoka Tano during the later half of the Clone Wars and Ahsoka's Ventress during the early days of the Clone Wars while she was still serving under Count Dooku, which would have ultimately developed Zidane into a very focused practitioner of Form 4 Ataru when Zidane fought with the Mage Master's dagger separate, with elements of Form 6 Nine-Man being applied once Zidane attached the two daggers to form a double-bladed sword. Interestingly enough, both Ataru and Nine-Man provide training in Jar-Kai dual-wielding combat. Ataru was a highly aggressive form focusing on speed maneuvers and not only staying in a constant state of motion, but using the entire body as a weapon and not just relying on the blades themselves. But due to its combative focus, it was not recommended for long-term engagement, and a user would burn through their stamina faster than any other fighting form, and on top of that, it seriously lacked precision. With enough time and practice, this kind of weakness could be smoothed out to a point. Form 6 Nine-Man was the moderation form and was a hybrid martial art created by effectively combining elements of the preceding 5 forms into a single genderized form. Because of its focus on moderation, Nine-Man lacked any real combative strengths, but also lacked any serious weaknesses, which ultimately allows the user to always have their bases covered in all forms of combat, but not really being able to take any kind of advantages either. When it comes to Zidane's use of Jar-Kai dual wielding with the use of two blades in combat, it provides a user improved offensive and defensive options and an increased rate of attack with an even greater ability to engage multiple enemies attacking from multiple different directions at once. Due to the greater focusing of needing to control oneself between two blades, Jar-Kai techniques made it significantly difficult for a user to apply the force, or in this case, magical abilities within one's combative approach. Only practitioners who had an absolute master level of control over their combative forces with both their weapons and magical control could overcome this weakness. However, one weakness that cannot be overcome with someone such as Zidane is that a pure focus on wielding one weapon in each hand can cause a user to be placed at a serious disadvantage should he be disarmed of one of his weapons, which is why connecting the two weapons to make the weapon harder to disarm is a balancing act that Zidane at all times must be conscious of knowing when to attach and detach his weapons, which can be the deciding factor to his victory or his defeat. Before the initial destruction of Zanarkand by Sin, Tidus was not very prone to combat, and his physical build made him very ill-prepared to develop into the typical class of a first-grade warrior. However, despite not being the toughest nor even the strongest member of the group, he was able to use his athletic prowess and his extensive combat experience over the course of High Summoner Yuna's pilgrimage to develop into the party's primary speed fencer, making him the perfect opener for the group in just about every big engagement that they ever encountered. In my personal opinion, being a dedicated speed fencer made him one of the fastest swordsmen in the entire franchise, second to only perhaps Sephiroth by a wide margin. With his martial skills being toned with his experiences against multiple opponents at once, and his focusing on using speed to work around an opponent's guard, with his lack of physical strength along with his willingness to use his entire body as a weapon, Tidus would have been a competent practitioner in Forms 1 Seicho, Form 2 Makashi, and Form 4 Ataru. Seicho was the basic fighting form to allow users to better tone themselves to how to properly manipulate their movement of their weapon, and its movement set was comprised of wide sweeping strikes to lash out at multiple opponents. However, its focus on wide sweeping maneuvers and techniques left it not very good with precision, making the form terrible against a single well-trained opponent. Form 2 Makashi's focus on offense provided very little defense, and because of its combative focus on precision, speed fencers of the form were encouraged to work around an opponent's guard rather than attempting to meet an opponent's offense or defensive head-on. As its moveset did not allow a user to apply much strength in their blows, and its lack of defensive principles made it very weak against more strength-focused forms, as a power duelist would be able to easily power through and overwhelm Makashi's kinetic maneuvers. Form 4 Ataru was known as the aggression form, and its entire moveset required the user to stay in a constant state of motion, moving around, allowing one to apply a high variety of attacks in an attempt to overwhelm an opponent's guard or attack in an exposed vector. However, Ataru's high level of combative movements made the practice of this form extremely exhausting, burning through a user's stamina, making a focus in it very unrealistic for a solo long-term engagement. Despite not having gone through any official proper training during his time as a Guardian, Tidus was a quick learner on the battlefield, and having the opportunity to fight alongside prone, proper warriors like Orin and Kamari gave Tidus a venue to build upon his own unique skill set to make up for what they lacked. However, despite learning valuable martial lessons on the battlefield that could certainly play into his combative strengths, he clearly lacked on the tactical side of combat, simply acting as an opener to engage and being more willing to fall back to a supporting role once the initial phase of the battle was past. What Tidus lacked the most was the tactical foresight to be able to apply his skill set properly when he was not allowed to plan out and take control of the fight. Instead, he just made things up as he went along and spotted potential weaknesses that he could exploit. Then from that point on, he would spam the hell out of it. However, his lack of tactical foresight and his use of one-dimensional fighting techniques left Tidus with no defensive fallback options should his attempt to overwhelm an opponent with his speed fail, and over the course of a battle would leave him very unpredictable. As both Zidane and Tidus are dedicated speed fencers, they share a lot of similarities in their approaches to combat, but have enough differences that an advantage can be given. If we were to compare these two in terms of which one had more combat experience and more time to refine their practices, then Zidane would take the edge in a landslide. Zidane has been working and perfecting his combative craft and lifestyle as a thief since the age of 4, while Tidus, at most, from the moment Sin attacked Zanarkand in the past to the moment he disappeared after defeating Yevon, he would have had a month to a month and a half at most of practical combat experience. However, despite this fact, in a surprise upset, I would still grant Tidus the slight edge in this department. The reason being that despite all Zidane has at his disposal, in a combative martial sense, despite Tidus' lack of combative experience when compared to Zidane, he is still a much more focused combatant who has fewer weaknesses than Zidane. Zidane's entire combative approach of his martial skills, apart from his magical and special abilities, is plagued with combative lapses, which cannot be confused with weaknesses. For example, Zidane's decision to wield his blades in reverse grip is problematic in design. The reverse grip is inferior to the standard grip applied by the vast majority of sword wielders in all of Final Fantasy. The first problem is efficiency. Regardless of what kind of weapon your opponent is using, there's only so many angles of attacks that are possible to perform, and in such a fast-paced engagement like this is going to be, vertical swings, horizontal slashes, and piercing strikes, which are key moves to a speed fencer's arsenal of attacks, are going to be significantly more difficult to pull off, and in some cases impractical for Zidane to pull off. Speed is the most important element in any kind of efficient swordsmanship, whether you're trying to use one's strength to pound through an opponent's defenses or trying to use precision to exploit an opening. If Zidane is holding his blades downward, not only does that make it that much harder to defend his upper body, but the angle of Zidane's arm is going to be telegraphing which direction his blade has to go, which at such high speeds, Tidus will be able to see and dodge all of Zidane's strikes and easily counterattack. If Tidus were to strike towards Zidane's head, instead of simply turning one's wrist in order to block the strike as would be possible if Zidane held his weapon in a standard grip, with a reverse grip he has to move his entire arm in order to block the attack, and in a fight like this, when it comes to swordsmanship, things can be determined in milliseconds. There's even a number of problems that Zidane will face should he attach his blades together, because though he now has an entirely new set of possible attacks, it also significantly limits what type of attacks are effective and what counters he can perform. In the lamest terms, Zidane has spent his entire life as a thief using a method that ultimately is working against the style of combat that he has chosen to use. While Tidus's weaknesses have nothing to do with the techniques of Ataru itself, but more of its effect on his body, and this is something that he knows, and he has spent his entire combative career working to either set up the battlefield for his allies to take over, or to get in a quick victory before the weaknesses of his form completely burning through his stamina comes into effect. So to sum it up in a pure martial and tactical sense, while Zidane and Tidus did study the same form, Tidus is doing it the right way, while Zidane has been doing it all wrong this entire time. Now, that isn't to say that Zidane sucks as a speed fencer, because he has made it work for him, but compared to the other speed fencers like Tidus or the GOAT himself Sephiroth, who also favors speed fencing approaches, Zidane's variation has too many technical problems, and in the early stages of this fight, Tidus will take advantage of it and leave Zidane at a serious disadvantage until he falls back on a different approach. And for all these reasons, I grant Tidus the edge in martial skills and battle tactics. When it comes to pitting Zidane against Tidus, this particular matchup really stands out for me, because though there is a clear winner, it may not be for the exact reasons that most of you may think. While in a pure physical combative sense, Tidus is unquestionably the superior fighter, Zidane ultimately has the more significant abilities at his disposal to take total control of this fight, and once he does, that will make it impossible for Tidus to make any sort of comeback, which ultimately would lead to Zidane winning this fight. Though Tidus certainly has the overall physical advantage, Zidane has the advantage in the two physical factors that matter the most for any speedster, and that is stamina and durability. While Tidus is certainly not a lightweight, he can't take nearly as much punishment as Zidane, and while being an athlete means that he certainly is aware of how to manage his stamina properly, Zidane has the means to force Tidus to burn up his stamina quickly, or even worse, prevent him from enhancing his physical performance, and this all comes down to their magical and special abilities, which is the key to this fight. While Zidane's trance ability certainly has the potential to completely blow Tidus away, the odds are that once Tidus sees this transformation and realizes that most of his support and extra magical abilities will be of no effect, he will immediately rely on his haste spell to speed up his physical performance, but not to go on the offense, but to simply go on the evasion. And this is exactly how Zidane can turn Tidus' greatest strength against him, by forcing him to have to burn up his stamina. And by the time the trance ability expires, Tidus is going to be far too burned out to attempt any kind of counter offense, which would ultimately leave Zidane to take the win very quickly. Tidus is the perfect example of a pure speedster or a Taro user, and a perfect comparison would be to someone like Grandmaster Yoda. They both can get a lot of early hits in with the idea of overwhelming an opponent quickly, but if they are facing someone who can either take the extra damage or draw the fight out long enough, then both Tidus and Yoda as combatants would burn themselves out stamina wise. The perfect example of how this fight would end up would be the final moments of the Duel of Fates in Star Wars The Phantom Menace between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. For the entirety of the fight, Maul had specific objectives that he was executing. He perfectly managed to separate Qui-Gon from Obi-Wan, lead the fight to a location of his own choice, forcing Qui-Gon to give chase, and burn his stamina out. And then once Qui-Gon was tired, he forced him into a corner and took him down. And while Zidane doesn't have the tactical foresight to plan that far ahead, the final result would play out the same. This fight will play out over the course of 3 stages. In the opening stage, Tidus' superior physicality and combative technique will allow him to take the immediate advantage against Zidane. Despite having 2 weapons at his disposal, which should have made it easier for him to block all of Tidus' strikes, but Tidus is simply moving too fast all around Zidane, and Zidane is getting hit, as his reverse grip style is making it twice as hard to defend himself, and Tidus is exploding all of Zidane's openings. Zidane, despite moving pretty fast himself, is simply not able to move as fast as Tidus and can't seem to get any hits on him. But despite taking all this damage, Zidane is still in this fight, as his advantage and durability is allowing him to stay in the fight. As we move into the second stage, this is where everything is about to make a complete 180, as the constant strikes on Zidane are really starting to get to him and he is getting more frustrated. And in his frustration, his emotions get to him and he immediately enters his trance form. Tidus jumps back a good distance, having no idea what just happened. He's seen some pretty impressive transformations in his time, but this appears to be a bit different. As Zidane just stares at Tidus with angry and focused eyes, Tidus decides to fire off a slow spell at Zidane, but it has absolutely no effect on him. In response, Zidane fires off a tidal flame attack at Tidus, who just barely manages to jump out of the way before it engulfs him. Realizing that he's in serious trouble, Tidus has no choice but to cast haste on himself, and he starts to run. Zidane gives chase and continues to fire special attack after special attack, while Tidus is successfully running, dodging, and getting out of the way of each attack. He is not given any opportunity to analyze Zidane or think of any type of counterattack, and he is simply focusing on surviving and not getting hit. This goes on for a minute or two, in which ultimately takes us to the final stage in the finale of this fight. Just as Zidane's trance form expires, Tidus drops to his knees completely gassed, as being forced to use his haste spell on himself has completely burned away all of his stamina, while Zidane is still feeling fresh and immediately goes on the attack. Before Tidus realizes what is going on, he is hit with a barrage of attacks from Zidane that knocks him back a good distance. Tidus makes one final attempt to cast a magical spell at Zidane, but due to the properties of Zidane's Mage Master daggers, the silent effect has been cast on Tidus without him even realizing it. Zidane charges at Tidus to deliver the final blow, but before Zidane can do that, Tidus raises his hand and tells Zidane to stop, realizing that with his stamina depleted, his magic cut off, and not wanting to risk an overdrive attack which may bring out Zidane's trance ability again, Tidus drops to his knees and surrenders. I declare Zidane, the Angel of Death, the winner. And that will do it for this heavily requested matchup. If you like this video, please to share your thoughts and opinions on how you think this match will play out. If you like this video, also feel free to like and subscribe to keep track of me in my future upcoming final 3 matchups that I've planned for the remainder of the year. And like always, thank you guys for watching, you're awesome, and now like always, here's a preview of my next Versus Series matchup, which it too has been heavily requested by all of you for some time. Please enjoy.